Well, here it is. This is the all-new Ferrari SUV. In Italian, they call it Purosangue, but you're probably thinking I sound like an idiot when I say it like that, but that is how it's pronounced. Now, I was about to say we're finally driving it in Australia. We're not, but this is as close to Australia as this vehicle has gotten so far. We are in New Zealand, which means, at the very least, we are test driving this vehicle on the same side of the road as we drive in Australia. But there is a catch. These ones are left-hand drive. They're directly from the factory in Maranello. They are left-hand drive. However, we're going to drive them on exactly the kinds of roads here in New Zealand that we get to experience in Australia. To say this is going to be a good couple of days at the office is probably an understatement. And one of the things I'm going to try to answer is whether this is actually an SUV, because according to Ferrari, it isn't an SUV, even though it is kind of an SUV. We're going to find out whether that's the case or not. I'm looking forward to driving this thing. Let's get into it. There's a temptation with any supercar to say that if we need to ask the price, we can't afford it. But let's cover the basics here. It starts from an eye-watering $728,000 before on-road costs. And if you go crazy with the options list, you'll be forking out $1 million Australian once it's on the road. Super SUVs certainly don't come cheap. The engine is a masterpiece, as you'd expect from Ferrari, with the 6.5-litre V12 derived from the 812 supercar. A little muted in terms of the soundtrack that accompanies the fire and brimstone, it still generates 533 kilowatts and 716 newton meters. It will thunder the Purosangue from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in just 3.3 seconds, while the run to 200 kilometers an hour takes only 10.6 seconds. The four-seat cabin is comfortable and cements the Ferrari as perhaps the new gold standard in comfortable grand touring. It feels like a Ferrari, it looks like a Ferrari, and the driving position is more sports car than SUV. The rear-hinged rear doors, which look strange in theory, work well in practice and make accessing the second row easier than it otherwise would be. There's more room back there than we expected too, and it's comfortable even for adults when you have adults up front. The boot, yes, we are talking about a Ferrari boot, is useful without being massive. There's plenty of space for the kind of luggage two adults would take on a road trip, but it does start to get full quickly if you've got 4 adults on board. Now, there are 2 specific areas for me where the new Ferrari SUV that isn't an SUV doesn't feel like an SUV. The first is when you drive it. This absolutely does not feel like you're driving a big, heavy SUV. A lot of that's got to do with things like balance and control, the way the chassis is, the fact the engine's mounted so far back, the steering, the braking, all of those things, incredibly precise and very unlike what you would expect from an SUV. But, and I'm going to step out of shot in a minute so you can enjoy this and have a look without me ruining it, it's the way that it looks that I think most removes it from where SUVs sit. Have a look at the style of this. Yes, there's carbon fiber trim and the wheels are spectacular and it's got the right badging, but this is aggressive and still subtle and has that Italian design flair that is seemingly so difficult for so many other designers to execute regardless of the platform. But have a look at how stunningly designed this vehicle is. There's a lot of it that is actually effective, like the aero design and the way the air flows over the body to keep the car as aerodynamic as possible. And some of it are little things like the carbon fiber wheel arch trim and mirrors. This one's got a carbon fiber roof as well. There's plenty of things that you can option, but all around the styling of this thing is somehow aggressive, but subtle and also beautiful at the same time. The Ferrari design team has done an amazing job of executing the exterior of this car. And the good news is that the interior is just as impressive. And that's where we're going to go right now because we're going to take it for a drive. I guess the first thing to get out of the way, just in case you're noticing it and it looks a little bit weird, we are driving, as I said, a left-hand drive car on the left-hand side of the road. So we're in New Zealand, same as we would be in Australia, but we are driving these cars from Italy. So if it looks a bit weird that I'm over this side of the car with the road, edge of the road right there, that's why. Once you get your head around that, it's actually pretty easy and not as daunting as you might think if you've never done it before. The question that everybody wants answered really is what this feels like when you're behind the wheel and you're driving it. First up, I can say that as a passenger, the Purosangue is actually really impressive. The bump absorption, the compliance, the way that this rides over poor surfaces is really genuinely impressive given the outright performance that this is capable of. They're huge power, huge torque, 0 to 100 times are genuinely impressive. This is a really, really fast vehicle, regardless of whether it's a sports car or an SUV. So the way that it rides and the comfort level is really, really impressive. I think that's worth mentioning. As for whether it's an SUV or not, outside of the styling that we covered briefly, I reckon when you get behind the wheel and you drive it, that's where it becomes most evident to me that this is not an SUV equal to a lot of the other SUVs that we've tested. Now, there are plenty of fast SUVs around, and for whatever reason, manufacturers have decided that that's a path they really want to go down. They don't just want to deliver an SUV, they want to deliver one that delivers sports car levels of performance. So there's plenty of them in the market, but there's something different about the Ferrari, and you might expect that because it's a Ferrari, but there is absolutely something different about this. It could be that it's a bespoke platform, it could be that it's not quite as high riding, it could be that it doesn't feel top heavy. It's very low in the way that the balance is set up and it feels low to the ground. That could be a factor as well. But this doesn't feel like an SUV to drive. It feels like a Ferrari. When you sit here in the driver's seat behind the steering wheel with the Manettino switch there on the right, and the same switchgear that you're familiar with from other Ferraris, this feels like a Ferrari. And I think that is really important, because I think the Ferrari buyer, that's what they want. That's absolutely what they want when they buy this kind of car. As for whether an existing Ferrari owner would buy this vehicle, I don't know. That's up to them to decide. But I can tell you that if they're new to the brand and they get in this is going to feel like they're driving a Ferrari. So I think that is really important, and that's something that the brand said it wanted to deliver from the outset, and that it has delivered. In terms of the speed, the pace, all of the performance indicators, the Purosangue is very, very impressive. It turns in the steering, the balance, the fact that the engine is set so far back, the way that this feels on a tight, twisty road when you really hook into it and you start to have some fun is incredible. It feels way more like a sports car than you might have thought by looking at it. And overall, this is just an incredibly special driving experience. It's one that puts a smile on your face every time you're behind the wheel, and it makes you feel special when you're behind the wheel, which I think is absolutely crucial. This is a sensational car, and ultimately, I don't think it matters whether you call it an SUV or a sports car or something in between. For me, it's more Grand Tourer than anything else, but I don't think it matters what you call it. I just think Ferrari has done a sensational job, and I think anyone who gets in one of these is going to absolutely love it.
Well, the question I posed at the start of this review that I said I'd endeavour to answer was whether the Ferrari Purosangue is actually an SUV or not, because according to Ferrari, it most certainly isn't. A couple of things that it is, though, to start with. It is beautiful to look at, it is incredibly special to drive, and it is a very, very capable Grand Tourer. It's an seriously impressive engineering exercise, and the fact that Ferrari's created this from the ground up tells you everything you need to know about the Ferrari brand and what it's about. Now, the reason that I kind of reluctantly have to agree with Ferrari that it might not be an SUV in the classical sense is because it is effectively like a Grand Tourer with a little bit more ground clearance. This feels like a Ferrari to drive. Now, that might sound strange because you're not looking at a supercar, but it's got a 6.5 litre V12 in it. It sounds like a Ferrari. It feels like a Ferrari from inside. And when you put your foot down, you know that it's a Ferrari that you're driving. But it doesn't feel like an SUV. It doesn't feel like it's really tall. You don't have any of that body roll. It's quite controlled. It's fantastic to drive on a twisty road, as we've done here in New Zealand. So this vehicle does a hell of a lot of things that not very many SUVs do at all, or certainly don't do very well. So I have to reluctantly agree with the guys at Ferrari that this is not an SUV if you're accustomed to judging a vehicle the way that we judge a regular SUV. This is very special. Let us know what you think in the comments section below. Do you love the look of it, most importantly? Because with a Ferrari, especially as we move to electrification, you're going to see one before you hear it. And this one, you obviously hear it, but you're going to see a Ferrari before you hear it. Styling is incredibly important to anyone that's buying this kind of vehicle. Let us know what you think of the styling in the comments section below. In the meantime, everything that you need to know about the Ferrari Purosangue and everything else that we've road tested, that's over at Drive.com.au. Don't forget to hit like if you've enjoyed the video. Click on subscribe so you stay up to date with all of our latest video content. And as I said, everything you need to know, that's over at Drive.com.au.